Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2014 National Budget Breakfast, brought to you by the South African Institute of Tax Professionals and the Financial Planning Institute of Southern Africa as well. I'm Alicia Seckham. I'm a business news anchor at Business Day TV, and I'll be facilitating the proceedings over the next 2 hours or so. Now, after Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan's tabling of Budget 2014 in Parliament yesterday, we've had a bit of time to actually delve into and dissect some of the detail behind just the headline figures. So today we hope to bring you some comprehensive post-budget analysis. Special thanks, of course, goes out to the sponsors of today's event. That's Stonehouse Capital, a gold sponsor of the event, and VIP Sage as well. We'll be starting things with presentations over the next hour, just to set the scene before getting into a panel discussion from 9 to 10 a.m. Speakers, a special note to you, we are on a very tight schedule this morning, so I really advise that you stick to timing. If you see me approaching the podium, it means that your time's up and you need to start wrapping up. Our panel of guests fielding questions this morning: Mike Schussler, Professor Stephen Friedman, Professor Jackie Arendse, Ronald King, and Christa Janse van Rensburg as well. Now, when it comes to that discussion, ladies and gentlemen, we'd really like to keep things as interactive as possible, and we're enabling that by posing any questions you might have to our esteemed panel of guests with us this morning. For those of you who are with us in the room, we've got a roving microphone that will be doing the rounds, so feel free to get involved that way. Just bear in mind that this is a regional event with broadcasts going through to Durban, Bloemfontein, PE, and Cape Town as well, and I urge those in those regions to interact with us here as well. All you've got to do is send through questions through the Twitter feed. Our handle this morning is @thesitesa, and you can use the hashtag FPISite2014. So start sending your questions through now, and we'll of course pose them to the panel, as I said, for you. To kick things into gear though, let's take stock of the overall economic climate. Minister Pravin Gordhan yesterday, as expected, revised downwards his growth projection for 2014 to 2.7%, and that from 3% that was stated in the midterm budget last October. Is this a realistic target? And at that level of growth, how are we expecting to see revenue collection rise from 899 billion rand this year to 1 trillion next year? Well, the majority struggled to see that level of growth really tackling the 25% unemployment rate in any meaningful way, and so certainly not working to widen the tax base or the tax collection base for one. At the same time, with the revenue collection on the up and the ceiling on expenditure not being broken through, we've had that deficit narrowing down to 4% of GDP. So the Finance Minister managing yet again to walk a pretty tight rope for the 5th time, and some saying we've got to give credit where credit's due. I'd like to call Mike Schussler of economist.co.za to the podium, though, to really spell out all that we're looking at here.
Thank you, Alicia. I must say this is more than a decade that we've been involved with the site, and it's been a pleasure. The one big thing I think that all the budgets have been doing over all that time, when I think back at it, is it's been a little bit of a smoke and mirrors exercise. And this budget is no different. It's just under much more difficult circumstances. I think the minister did state, let's see if this thing works, that he was passed a hospital pass, which is true. Just hope my slide comes. Can we just move the slide on one? Okay, let me just anyway, carry on. And he did get a hospital pass because in 2008, we were just entering the recession. In 2009, when he became the finance minister, we were in a full-blown, worldwide, big, great recession. The world has slowly moved out of it. And this year, for the first time, for example, America is going to be expected to grow at around 3%. Europe is in positive territory, but it is. The same is happening in many other areas of the advanced economies. The emerging markets are slowing down, and we are seeing, already there, this thing's not working. So what we have, let me see if it works from here. No. We have that sort of situation. And South Africa had to spend a lot of money. We brought down our debt levels. We brought down our government deficit. In other words, the government was at one stage in 2008 actually taxing more than it was spending, which is a good thing because it was bringing down our debt to GDP level quite dramatically. Now, however, we've got a situation where the growth is really, really under pressure. And I wish we could get the slide up. Could we go about 3 or 4 slides on to the South African growth?
Just give a signal error. To put it for you on a computer, and the computer, there's a signal error between.
Okay. There's apparently a signal error. But ultimately, what I want to say is if you go and look just from last year, what people were expecting, other economists, the consensus economic growth has declined radically. So I put last year's slide together, and I then put in this year's number with last year's numbers in brackets. And you can see how all the forecasts and the actual outcomes have come down. Last year, the growth was expected to be around 2.7 or 2.8% still at this point of the year, and it ultimately came in at 1.9. Even Treasury, when they do their forecasts, we had a look yesterday, the actual forecast for 13, 14 and 15 was 3.6 average. They've now brought it down to 2.6 average because the one year we actually have in at 1.9, so we're missing 1% of growth. That's taken away a lot of money from government. And ultimately, it's making that whole situation very, very tough because that growth in revenue isn't there unless you increase taxes. And that's my message to you. Every year, that's the PR part we've had. Every year, they keep telling you, oh, you got so many billions off in your personal income tax. You didn't. It was 9 billion last year, yes, but it's less than 3% when they're forecasting inflation to be 6.2%. So again, you're actually having an increase, and that small tax base. Oh yes, this is another exercise. They told you there were 15 million registered taxpayers. The word payers there is a misdemeanor offense. In fact, there's 5 million registered taxpayers actually paying, all right, actually a bit less, of which 3 million actually pay 95% of all taxes. So someone's saying to you, we've got a problem here or we're not got a problem. So everything is geared in the budget. Every budget that you've had is geared to impressing that we're doing certain things right. And the other thing, that when we look at the South African tax base, it is very small. It is now getting to the point where you cannot just continue taxing these people more and more and more. We're trying to find other ways. So we're thinking maybe we should have a carbon tax. Well, Australia already scrapped their target carbon tax, and many others are not interested. Now we've got, acid minage draining tax of some sort or another that we want to bring in. So ultimately, we're looking for more ways to get money, because we're starting to realize that these guys that are in that grouping, they're the rich people in South Africa. There's no doubt. They're the people with jobs. But the people with jobs are being really, really put under pressure. And if they're put under pressure ever more, and the company's the same, then you do have a problem. And the other thing is, company taxes are not likely to come in quite as well in the next year or so. Because just think of it, a few years ago, our biggest taxpayer on the company side was a platinum mine. Today, we're entering the 6th week of a strike in a platinum mine. The other smaller platinum mine had 11 weeks of striking. So, from the social side of things as well, we're under pressure. We have service delivery protests because people have expected more, because the promises were so big. And the problem with the budget is it keeps making these promises. It says, people, we're going to give you a huge increase. But it's not a huge increase. If you look at the childcare grants over the year, they're going up with 6%. That's better than the taxpayers are getting a decline of 3%, but the guys receiving welfare are getting 6%, but that 6% is still slightly below the expected inflation of 6.2. So nobody is really winning in this circular argument of things. I think we're right on the first slide still, and I'm probably at slide 25. And that's maybe the whole thing that we've got to look at. So if we look at what they've promised in previous budgets, I wish we could get the slides up because I don't have all the numbers in my head, but the fact is that ultimately all the numbers are going up. All right, carry on. I don't know, it's a bit difficult. No, we can go on a bit more. Go on. Okay. This is just the current account deficit from 2012 medium-term budget policy statement for an average of 3 years from 2013 to 2015. You can see how much it got worse, and then this year it was pulled back a bit. And I think that pullback is maybe warranted, but it was also put out there because they started realizing that this is not a good thing, because that's what rating agencies are looking at. Rating agencies are saying, hey, South Africa, you're spending a lot more than you're producing, and you continue doing this. That's not good for your currency. That's not good for your ability to pay back loans and everything like that. So ultimately, you can see with the budget, he made that about 5.9%. He brought it back with 0.5%. But I think he could arguably say, because the rand's weakened so much, people are not going to import as much. We're not going to export extra, maybe a few bottles of wine or something, but the capacity constraints in the economy are so huge at the moment, there is no power. Last week, we had 25% of our electricity power was not there. Imagine if we didn't have the platinum strikes and those mines operated. We'd have had a lot more blackouts, and rolling blackouts would have been there. Can we go to the next slide? You can see the inflation forecasts for the same 3 years, how they've actually increased. So the prices are starting to come through, and inflation is nothing else than another tax on your pocket, because that's the price which goods are going to get more expensive with. Okay, so that's also taxing you, and you can see the 3-year average is now estimated to be 5.9%. And we've already got one of those 3 years in the bag, but that just shows you where the forecasts have gone. If you go to the next slide, please. You can see the budget deficit. We've actually brought that, kept it coming down reasonably. In 2012, we said it was going to be 4.5. Now it's going to be a roughly a 4% budget deficit. In it was 3.7, and for this year it's now gone to 4. Although just a while back it was at 4.1, but it has from the beginning got worse. And the same applies to when we look at 2012. We were supposed to be at 3.1 for next year of our budget deficit. We're now at 3.6. So yes, it is sort of still forecast to get better, but if you look at the previous forecast, it is worse. So this is a little bit of a muddle. And then he says, well, it's only going to be 2.9 in 3 years' time, or 2.8% budget deficit. The problem is, if you look at the history of these things, it's probably going to get worse. It's not going to be 2.8. And that's what the rating agencies are going to be looking at, because our state debt is certainly getting, as a percentage of GDP, going up. This is another story. Let's go to the next budget slide. We go to the next slide. If you look at the revenue forecasts, how small they were in 2012, it was going to be about 27.5% of GDP. It's now 29% of GDP. So you can see how these forecasts of revenue have also gone up. So each time there's a little carrot, oh, we're not taxing you more. But effectively, we are taxing the economy more if we look at the bigger picture. So every time we read the headlines, Pravin's given you something back and he's added something to the sin taxes. It's sort of true, but it's not reality. Because that's looking at the house from, one room. It's not looking at the big picture. Here the big picture is showing you we are taxing more. If we look at the spending side, which is the next slide, you can see the same trend. Spending is now going to be around 33% this year. It's supposed to go down next year, but 33% of GDP is quite a lot. It is increasing. This is the consolidated budget of all the government thing, and this excludes things like electricity, which effectively sponsors municipalities, and water, which sponsors municipalities, and so on. So the fact is, the government is getting bigger. It is spending more. There's not that much room to maneuver, maybe, with everything, but they are spending more and they are taxing more. So yes, they are looking at events. Some private events companies are probably going to go under because they probably will not survive the government cutting back. But that's small fry. And where people stay is also small fry. If we go to the next slide. If we go and look at stuff, okay, first of all, what was not said, that's also very interesting. In 2007 at Polokwane, and before then at the ANC policy conference, they thought up the idea of a national health insurance. It was supposed to come in a period of 12 years. It then later got made 14 years. He actually had a whole paragraph or 3, but he's first going to investigate prices in the private hospital and quality in public hospitals and so on before he's going to implement it. He's got a trial and it carries on. But there's no implementation date. And anything that a politician promises you in 14 years' time, as I said last year, doesn't happen. And this year, it got kicked another year down the road. Not a word was said on strikes and their damaging effect on the economy. We've got to talk about these things. If we don't, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We need strong leadership. Strong leadership sometimes says, you tell people you are hurting the economy. Am I right? Because if we don't do that, these guys think it's okay. We're not hurting the economy. We're just hurting ourselves. Anyway, Social Security, that was also promised in 2008 budget. Just nothing mentioned. So the state old age grant remains, but for people working, well, we're going to investigate those 6 million people without pension funds and the like, but it's still an investigation. If I got paid as a consultant for all the investigations that these guys did, I'd be a multi-millionaire and wouldn't have to talk to you. Okay, the government deliveries. But with other words, what did you promise? You promised at some stage 250,000 houses. Then you lowered that promise and said, well, it'll be sort of 250,000 structures or plots or something. And now it's 216,000 in the next year. So, where are those delivery targets, those specific targets that they put up at stages that are just being thrown about? Nothing is said on that. So no wonder the populace doesn't understand what is going on. If we keep telling people we've built so many schools, it's one thing they did mention, how many schools were built, how many clinics, how much do we spend per pupil at school? Now we know that was last year 17,500. Those are the things that we should be saying. Let's go to the next slides. I'm a bit dear mekaar. I think the computer is as well. They mention so many new taxes again. Every year there's no means test stuff said. There's no stuff that's talking about the old age grants where you won't have a means test. So poorer people, or sort of our middle class, which are getting maybe a transit pensioner, which is getting a pension of, say, 2,000 rand or something, could supplement it with an old age grant. That's what we need to look at. We know that the debt to GDP is 48. Oh, this one's completely on the wrong one. It's also not talking. Can we go to the next one after this? So when we look at the results of what's happened in the last while, here's the one. This is why we're getting ratings downgrades. Look at the debt to GDP. It's starting to climb radically. I remember a little while ago, he was saying it wasn't going to, we were 23%. And we were going to get out of this mess, and we weren't going to go out of 38% of GDP, debt to GDP. Well, that was gross debt. Okay? He's now changed it to net debt, and he says we won't go over 44.3%. But gross debt to GDP is 48.5% that we're going to go to. And we've never stuck to those promises. So debt is going to climb. There's some people in the market that have worked out that we're probably going to go around the 60% debt to GDP level, which is not going to be good for the rating agencies. If you go to the next slide, please. Okay, you can see what it's done to yields. Thank you, Alicia. And it's really picked up those yields in the last while. So interest rates are going up. Government is going to pay more for their debt. We're going to pay more. The current account is still negative, so we pay people more, state employees and the like. And what do? We don't spend it on South African products. We buy cell phones and computers and cars, anything that's here, and that affects our rand. So I think there is a bigger chance of a downgrading. I think part of the reason why the rand dropped with 10 cents or so, yes, could be emerging market jitters. But when the guys look through this and they compare it to the previous years, they're going to see, wait a minute, things aren't always what you say they are. You're becoming a little bit of a Pinocchio. Your nose is growing slightly longer, and your pocket is getting slightly smaller. So I think that's the point. I think we're at the end of my presentation. I think he's had a very difficult time. And at the same time, there are rumors that he may or may not stay. This is a very, very difficult time for our country the last few years. And this budget, I think, has been his most difficult one. But it's showing us up. It's showing us up in such a way that we know that if we don't get growth going, the money isn't there. So the arguments are going to disappear about privatization, against privatization. We're going to see in the next 5 or 6 years, privatization is going to come back on the agenda. You're going to see all sorts of changes because the tax base hasn't grown. The tax base can't grow if there's not economic growth, and you can't spend your way out of trouble because it hasn't worked. We've had low interest rates and spending, and it hasn't helped us. But I think overall, Pravin Gordhan, in his term, these 5 years, has done very, very well as Minister of Finance. Thank you very much.